I stood in my kitchen at 3 a.m., holding a positive pregnancy test while reading a text message that would shatter everything I thought I knew about my life. The message was from my husband's phone, but it wasn't meant for me. It was meant for someone named Chloe, and it said things that made my hands shake as I realized I was holding evidence of a betrayal so deep it went far beyond simple infidelity. The baby growing inside me suddenly felt like the only honest thing left in my world. Michael's phone lay on the counter where he'd carelessly left it after another evening of what he called networking. But what I now understood was something entirely different. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The pregnancy test showed 2 bold pink lines, and his phone showed months of messages that revealed a man I had never truly known. 8 years of marriage, and I was discovering that the person sleeping beside me every night had been living a completely separate life. What I found in those messages wasn't just cheating. It was systematic deception on a scale that would make corporate fraud investigators take notice. The man who claimed his businesses were failing, who borrowed money from our joint accounts for rent and business expenses, who made me feel guilty for questioning his constant financial needs, had been hiding assets worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. The irony was suffocating. Here I was, 6 weeks pregnant with what should have been joyful news, scrolling through evidence that my husband had been planning his escape from our marriage for over a year. Every business failure he'd cried about, every investor meeting that never materialized, every excuse for why he needed more time and more money, had been carefully orchestrated lies designed to extract resources from me while building his exit strategy. My name is Jennifer Collins, and at 31 years old, I thought I had built the perfect life. Senior Marketing Director at Davidson Associates, a corner office with a view of downtown Phoenix, and a salary that had afforded us a beautiful home in Ahwatukee with mountain views and a pool that Michael loved to show off to his friends. I was the woman who could create marketing campaigns that turned unknown products into household names, who could identify consumer behavior patterns that others missed completely, who could spot market opportunities in the most saturated industries. Yet somehow I had completely failed to identify the most important pattern of all, the one happening in my own home every single day. The man I had supported financially, emotionally, and professionally for 8 years had been systematically lying to me about everything that mattered. His struggling food truck business that I had funded with my savings. His consulting company that existed only on business cards I had paid to print. His revolutionary fitness app that he claimed was still in development, but according to these messages had already been sold to a major corporation for $250,000. Standing in my granite kitchen, surrounded by the remnants of our dinner party from 2 nights earlier, I felt the full weight of how completely I had been manipulated. The pregnancy test in my left hand represented hope and new life. The phone in my right hand represented 8 years of systematic financial and emotional abuse, disguised as entrepreneurial ambition and temporary setbacks. Michael had left his phone behind because he was confident that I would never look, confident that his sweet, supportive wife would continue to believe his explanations and continue to fund his lifestyle while he built his secret empire, confident that even if I discovered something, I would choose preservation of our marriage over confrontation. He had spent 8 years training me to be understanding, supportive, and most importantly, unquestioning. The messages revealed a pattern that made my marketing expertise suddenly irrelevant, and my personal blindness absolutely devastating. While I had been working 60-hour weeks to maintain our lifestyle and fund his ventures, Michael had been creating multiple revenue streams that he never mentioned. The food truck that barely broke even, according to his tearful explanations to me, was actually profitable enough to fund his new BMW, hidden in a business account I didn't know existed. The consulting business that he claimed generated sporadic income was actually billing corporate clients at rates higher than my own hourly consulting fees. Reading through months of messages between Michael and Chloe, I discovered that she wasn't just his affair partner. She was his business partner, his financial advisor, and the person who helped him create the complex web of hidden accounts and shell companies that kept his money invisible to me. While I had been supporting his dreams, they had been building their future together, using my income as the stable foundation that allowed them to take entrepreneurial risks with guaranteed safety nets. The messages showed planning that would have impressed me in a corporate strategy session if it hadn't been designed to destroy my life. They discussed timing for his departure, strategies for minimizing alimony obligations, and methods for hiding assets during divorce proceedings. Michael had been preparing to leave me for over a year, but he had been waiting for the perfect moment when he could maximize his financial advantage and minimize his legal obligations. The pregnancy test suddenly took on a sinister dimension. According to the messages, Michael and Chloe had been discussing children, but not the one I was carrying. They had been planning their own family timeline, discussing when would be optimal for them to start having children together once his divorce was finalized. My pregnancy wasn't a surprise that had triggered his panic and temporary departure. It was an inconvenient complication in a plan that had been in motion long before I had any idea something was wrong. I found myself thinking about all the signs I had missed, all the explanations I had accepted, all the sacrifices I had made that now seemed ridiculous in the harsh light of actual truth. Michael's insistence that he handle all the business finances separately to avoid complicating our personal budget. His explanation that investors preferred to deal with single-entity businesses rather than mixed marital assets. His suggestion that I focus on my corporate career while he focused on building our long-term wealth through entrepreneurship. Every conversation about money, every discussion about our future, every decision about major purchases or investments had been filtered through his careful manipulation. When I had suggested we buy a larger house, he had explained that real estate wasn't the best investment during his business growth phase. When I had proposed starting a family 2 years earlier, he had convinced me that waiting until his companies were more established would give our children better financial security. When I had asked about retirement planning, he had assured me that his business investments would provide better returns than traditional retirement accounts. All of those reasonable-sounding explanations now revealed themselves as strategic delays designed to give him more time to build his hidden empire, while keeping me invested in a marriage that he was actively planning to escape. I had been funding my own abandonment, working extra hours to support businesses that existed primarily to hide money from me, sacrificing my own goals to support dreams that were never meant to include me in their ultimate success. The pregnancy test represented everything I had wanted our marriage to become: shared responsibility, shared joy, shared investment in a future that we would build together. The phone messages represented everything our marriage had actually been. One person extracting resources and support, while the other person sacrificed and contributed without any real partnership or reciprocity. Standing in my kitchen, I realized that Michael hadn't left me because of the pregnancy. He had left me because the pregnancy represented a legal complication that would make his planned financial escape more difficult and more expensive. Children meant custody obligations, child support requirements, and ongoing legal connections that would make it harder for him to simply disappear with his hidden assets. The pregnancy had accelerated his timeline, but it hadn't changed his fundamental plan. According to the messages, he and Chloe had been discussing the optimal timing for his departure for months. They had been waiting for the completion of his app sale and the establishment of certain offshore accounts that would protect his assets during divorce proceedings. My pregnancy had simply forced them to execute their plan earlier than they had originally intended. I spent the rest of the night reading through every message, documenting everything that seemed relevant, and slowly understanding the full scope of what had been done to me. This wasn't a marriage that had failed due to incompatibility or growing apart. This was a long-term financial fraud that had been disguised as a loving relationship. Michael hadn't been my husband in any meaningful sense. He had been a con artist who had identified me as a reliable source of funding and support for his actual life, which existed entirely separate from our marriage. By sunrise, I understood that everything I had believed about my marriage, my husband, and my own judgment had been carefully constructed illusion. The man who had promised to love and honor me had been systematically stealing from me while building a secret life with someone else. The businesses I had funded were real, but their profits had been hidden from me. The financial struggles I had helped him through were manufactured crises designed to extract additional resources while maintaining my sympathy and support. The pregnancy test sat on my kitchen counter next to pages of printed messages that told the story of my marriage from an entirely different perspective. In a few hours, Michael would return from his supposed business trip to Colorado, and I would have to decide how to confront him with what I had discovered. The woman who could analyze market trends and consumer behavior with surgical precision was about to apply those same skills to the most important analysis of her life. But first, I had to accept the reality that the man I had loved and supported for 8 years had never existed. The Michael I had married was a character created to extract maximum value from my income, my connections, and my emotional support, while giving me just enough affection and attention to keep me invested in the illusion. The real Michael was a stranger who had been living in my house, sleeping in my bed, and stealing my money while planning a future that had never included me. The pregnancy would proceed, but everything else about my life would have to be completely reconstructed. The foundation I had thought we were building together had always been entirely mine, funded by my work and maintained by my sacrifice. Now I would have to decide whether to salvage what was genuinely mine or tear down everything, and start fresh with the clarity that only complete betrayal can provide. Michael returned from Colorado that Tuesday evening, with the casual confidence of a man who believed his secrets were safe. He kissed my cheek, asked about my day, and began unpacking his suitcase while sharing details about his supposed investor meetings. The fitness app development was going well, he explained, but the investors needed more time to review the technical specifications. There might be additional delays, possibly requiring another round of funding to maintain the development timeline. I watched him perform this familiar routine, understanding now that every word was carefully calculated to maintain the financial pipeline I had unknowingly become. His investor meetings had been real, but they hadn't been seeking funding for development. According to the messages I had discovered, they had been finalizing the sale of an app that was already complete and ready for market. The delays he mentioned weren't development challenges, but strategic timing designed to maximize his profit while minimizing my legal claims to community property. The ease with which he delivered these lies was perhaps the most chilling discovery of all. This wasn't a man struggling with deception or feeling guilty about betraying his wife. This was a man who had become so comfortable with systematic dishonesty that he could create elaborate fictional narratives without any visible emotional strain. He asked what I wanted for dinner as if he were a loving husband concerned about my preferences, not a con artist managing his primary mark. I maintained normal conversation that evening while internally cataloging every detail of his performance. When he mentioned needing to transfer funds from our joint account to cover development costs, preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I recognized it as another extraction designed to move money into accounts I couldn't access. When he suggested postponing our planned vacation because of business demands, I understood it as creating space for activities with Chloe that were documented in their messages. When he expressed concern about my stress levels at work, I realized he was monitoring my emotional state to ensure I remained manageable and unsuspicious. The pregnancy announcement I had planned to share that evening became impossible. The joyful revelation I had imagined, the celebration we should have shared, the excited planning for our future as parents, all of it was rendered meaningless by the knowledge that he was already planning a different future with someone else. The child growing inside me deserved better than being announced to a father who would view the pregnancy as a legal and financial inconvenience rather than a blessing. That night, as Michael slept peacefully beside me, I began the process of strategic analysis that would define every decision moving forward. My marketing background had taught me that successful campaigns required understanding your target audience, identifying their motivations and weaknesses, and developing messaging that would achieve specific objectives. I was now applying those same principles to the most important campaign of my life, extracting myself and my child from a relationship that had been fundamentally fraudulent from the beginning. Michael's pattern of behavior suggested a man who felt completely secure in his position. He had trained me to be financially supportive, emotionally accommodating, and professionally focused on my own career rather than his business activities. He believed he had successfully compartmentalized his life in a way that would allow him to exit the marriage on his timeline with minimal financial consequences. His confidence would become his vulnerability. The next morning brought what I now recognized as another carefully orchestrated performance. Michael left early for a breakfast meeting with potential partners, kissing me goodbye and promising to call later about dinner plans. The breakfast meeting was real, according to his messages, but it was with Chloe and their attorney, finalizing legal strategies for protecting assets during divorce proceedings. They were planning his exit while he continued to extract resources from our joint accounts and maintain the appearance of a committed husband working hard to build our shared future. I used that morning to begin my own strategic planning. 8 years of marriage had given me extensive knowledge of Michael's business methods, his communication patterns, and his technological habits. He was methodical but not particularly security conscious, confident that his sweet wife would never think to investigate his activities. That confidence had led to careless digital footprints that would become crucial evidence in the months ahead. My first step was documenting everything I had discovered. The phone messages were just the beginning of a digital trail that revealed the scope of his deception. His laptop, which he often left open on our kitchen counter, contained business files that contradicted every financial statement he had ever shown me. The struggling food truck business maintained detailed profit and loss statements, showing consistent monthly revenues that exceeded our household budget. The consulting company he claimed generated sporadic income had contracts with major corporations worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. The fitness app that was supposedly still in development had correspondence with licensing partners dating back 6 months, indicating that the sale had been negotiated and finalized while he was still asking me to cover our household expenses because business income was unpredictable. The technical delays he frequently mentioned were fictional, created to explain why he couldn't contribute to household finances while maintaining the illusion that success was always just around the corner. Michael's business files revealed a level of financial success that made his constant requests for money from our joint accounts particularly cruel. While I worked extra hours and took on additional consulting projects to maintain our lifestyle, he had been generating substantial income that he funneled into accounts I didn't know existed. The man who claimed he couldn't afford to contribute to our mortgage payment had purchased a new BMW for cash 3 months earlier, hiding the purchase through a business lease arrangement that kept the asset invisible to me. The documentation process revealed how thoroughly I had been manipulated, not just financially, but emotionally. Every time I had expressed concern about our budget or questioned his business expenses, Michael had responded with emotional manipulation designed to make me feel guilty for doubting his efforts. He would become hurt and defensive, explaining how hard he was working to build our future, and how my lack of faith was adding pressure during an already stressful time. These emotional manipulations had been particularly effective because they played on my professional identity as a problem solver and my personal identity as a supportive partner. I prided myself on being solution-oriented rather than obstacle-creating, on being encouraging rather than discouraging, on being the type of wife who helped her husband achieve his dreams rather than holding him back with doubts and concerns. Michael had weaponized these positive qualities, turning my strengths into tools for his continued deception. The pregnancy added another layer of complexity to what was already a devastating discovery. Every decision I made now affected not just my own future, but the future of the child I was carrying. The financial security I thought we had built together was entirely dependent on my income, which meant my child's security was entirely dependent on decisions I would make as a single mother. The family structure I had imagined providing was already destroyed, even though the destruction had been carefully hidden from me. But the pregnancy also provided clarity about what mattered most moving forward. This child deserved a parent who valued honesty, integrity, and authentic partnership. If Michael was capable of systematically deceiving me about fundamental aspects of our shared life, he was not someone who could be trusted with the responsibility of raising a child. The qualities that made him an effective con artist would make him a destructive father figure. My professional background had taught me that successful outcomes required clear objectives, thorough planning, and strategic execution. My personal situation now demanded the same approach. I needed to protect my financial interests, secure evidence of Michael's deception, and position myself for the strongest possible legal outcome while minimizing emotional damage and stress during pregnancy. The woman who could develop marketing strategies for Fortune 500 companies was fully capable of developing a personal strategy that would protect both my immediate needs and my long-term interests. The first phase would be intelligence gathering. Michael's confidence in his security made him careless about digital footprints, financial records, and communication patterns. His messages with Chloe provided a roadmap to hidden assets and business arrangements, but they also revealed ongoing plans that I could monitor and potentially use to my advantage. Knowledge of his timeline would allow me to control the timing of confrontation in a way that maximized my legal position. The second phase would be asset protection. Michael's pattern suggested he was planning to strip as much money as possible from our joint accounts before filing for divorce or forcing me to file. But his messages also revealed that he believed he had more time to execute this plan. I could potentially freeze or redirect those funds before he realized his timeline had been compromised. The third phase would be legal positioning. Michael and Chloe's messages discussed their assumptions about my likely response to divorce proceedings. They expected me to be emotional, hurt, and focused on trying to save the marriage rather than on strategic financial protection. They had underestimated both my analytical capabilities and my access to excellent legal counsel through my corporate connections. The fourth phase would be personal reconstruction. Beyond the immediate crisis of divorce and financial protection, I needed to build a life structure that would support successful single motherhood while maintaining my professional advancement. This meant leveraging my career success to create long-term security for both myself and my child. As I developed this strategic framework, I found myself feeling something I hadn't expected: relief. The discovery of Michael's deception was devastating, but it was also liberating. For years, I had questioned my own judgment about our relationship, wondering why someone as successful as me in professional contexts seemed to struggle with managing our personal finances and relationship dynamics. Now I understood that those struggles hadn't been due to my personal failings, but to Michael's systematic manipulation. The pattern recognition skills that had made me successful in marketing were finally being applied to the most important analysis of my life. Michael's behavior followed predictable patterns that could be tracked, anticipated, and countered. His confidence in his ability to manipulate me was based on past success, but his past success had been achieved against a woman who didn't know she was being manipulated. Armed with knowledge of his actual motivations and methods, I could anticipate his strategies and develop counter-strategies that would protect my interests. The pregnancy test on my kitchen counter no longer represented just surprise or concern about timing. It represented motivation for the most important campaign of my professional life, ensuring that my child would grow up in an environment defined by honesty, security, and authentic relationships, rather than manipulation, deception, and emotional exploitation. Michael returned home that evening with flowers and suggestions for a romantic dinner, behavior that I now recognized as maintenance activities designed to keep me emotionally invested in the relationship, while he finalized his exit strategy. His attentiveness wasn't genuine affection but careful management of a valuable resource. The compliments he offered about my work success weren't expressions of pride in his wife's achievements, but acknowledgments of the income stream that funded his lifestyle. I accepted his flowers and agreed to dinner plans while internally noting how his behavior aligned with the maintenance schedule discussed in his messages with Chloe. They had calculated that periodic romantic gestures would be necessary to maintain my emotional investment during the final months of his extraction plan. Even his expressions of love had been strategically planned rather than spontaneously felt. That evening, as we sat in the restaurant where we had celebrated our last anniversary, I watched Michael perform the role of devoted husband, while knowing that he was mentally calculating how many more of these performances would be necessary before he could safely disappear. The man across from me wasn't my husband in any meaningful sense. He was a stranger who had been hired to play the role of my husband while systematically stealing from me and planning to abandon me. The pregnancy announcement I had initially planned to share over this romantic dinner remained unspoken. The child growing inside me deserved to be announced to a father who would celebrate the news, not to a con artist who would view it as a complication to his carefully planned escape. Michael would learn about the pregnancy when it served my strategic interests, not when it served his emotional manipulation or timeline management. The campaign to extract myself and my child from this fraudulent marriage would require every skill I had developed in my professional career. But for the first time since discovering the truth about Michael, I felt confident rather than devastated. The woman who could create marketing strategies that generated millions in revenue was fully capable of creating a personal strategy that would protect her child's future and ensure that systematic deception would be met with strategic consequences. The next 3 weeks became a masterclass in strategic deception, except this time I was the one controlling the narrative. Michael continued his routine of loving husband and struggling entrepreneur, while I quietly gathered evidence that would dismantle every lie he had constructed over 8 years of marriage. His confidence in my continued naivete became the foundation for my most successful investigation yet. Every morning after Michael left for his supposed business meetings, I systematically documented the digital trail of his hidden empire. His password habits were predictable, using variations of dates and locations that held significance in our shared history, ironically making it easier for me to access accounts that were meant to remain secret from me. The man who had spent years deceiving me had never imagined that I might possess the analytical skills to uncover his methods. The scope of his financial deception was staggering in its complexity and cruel in its execution. While I had been working overtime to afford our mortgage payments, Michael had been collecting rental income from 3 properties purchased through business entities I had never heard of. While I had been transferring money from my savings to cover his claimed business expenses, he had been depositing corporate consulting fees that exceeded my annual salary into offshore accounts established through shell companies. The fitness app that had supposedly consumed years of development time and tens of thousands of my dollars had been completed and sold 18 months earlier. The buyer was a fitness corporation that had licensed the technology for their premium membership platform, generating ongoing royalty payments that Michael had been collecting while maintaining the fiction that the app was still in beta testing. The emotional support I had provided during his supposed setbacks and the financial support I had provided during his supposed development challenges had been extracted under completely false pretenses. But the most devastating discovery was the systematic nature of his exit planning. The messages between Michael and Chloe revealed that they had been consulting with divorce attorneys for over 6 months, developing strategies to minimize his community property obligations while maximizing his ability to hide assets acquired during our marriage. They had researched jurisdictional advantages, studied asset protection methods, and created a timeline for transferring funds to accounts that would be difficult for me to discover or claim during divorce proceedings. Michael had been planning to file for divorce immediately after completing the transfer of certain business assets to entities that appeared to be independent but were actually controlled by Chloe. His plan was to claim that his businesses had failed just before the divorce filing, making it appear that there were minimal assets to divide, while the actual wealth remained hidden in structures designed to look like separate enterprises. The timing of his departure hadn't been emotional panic about the pregnancy, but strategic positioning to execute a financial plan that had been in development for months. The pregnancy had indeed accelerated his timeline, but not because he was afraid of becoming a father. According to his communications with both Chloe and his attorney, the pregnancy represented a legal complication that would create ongoing financial obligations and make it more difficult to relocate his business operations to states with more favorable divorce laws. They had been planning to establish residency in Nevada, where community property laws might be less advantageous to me, but the pregnancy meant that custody considerations would require maintaining Arizona residency. Reading through their strategic discussions felt like reviewing a corporate acquisition plan, except the target being acquired was my financial destruction. They analyzed my probable emotional responses, my likely legal strategies, and my expected financial resources for divorce proceedings. They had underestimated every single element of my actual capabilities, assuming that the supportive wife who had funded Michael's lifestyle would be too emotionally devastated to mount an effective legal defense. Their assumption that I would prioritize saving the marriage over protecting my financial interests was particularly naive. Michael had spent 8 years training me to be accommodating and understanding, to prioritize his needs over my own concerns, to interpret his failures as temporary setbacks rather than systematic exploitation. But he had never considered that those same analytical skills that made me successful in marketing campaigns might eventually be applied to analyzing his behavior patterns. The evidence I gathered painted a picture of a man who had approached our marriage as a long-term business investment, with me as the primary asset being exploited. Every major decision in our relationship had been filtered through his calculation of how to maximize extraction while minimizing my awareness or resistance. His expressions of love had been strategic maintenance designed to preserve my willingness to continue funding his lifestyle. His promises about our future had been tactical delays designed to keep me invested while he built his exit strategy. But Michael's most significant miscalculation was his assumption that I lacked the knowledge or connections to mount an effective response. My position at Davidson Associates had provided me with extensive experience in corporate investigations, asset protection strategies, and forensic accounting methods. The skills that had made me successful in analyzing market competition and corporate financial structures were directly applicable to unraveling Michael's deliberately complex business arrangements. More importantly, my professional network included attorneys, investigators, and financial experts who specialized in exactly the type of sophisticated financial deception that Michael had created. The corporate world had taught me that complex fraudulent schemes often appeared overwhelming to their victims, but they became manageable when approached with proper expertise and systematic analysis. The pregnancy test that remained on my bathroom counter served as daily motivation for the most important investigation of my career. This child deserved a mother who could provide financial security independent of any support from Michael, and that security would require recovering assets that legally belonged to our community property but had been hidden through deliberate deception. More importantly, this child deserved protection from a father who viewed relationships as opportunities for exploitation rather than partnership. My strategic planning became increasingly sophisticated as I understood the full scope of Michael's deception. Phase 1 had been intelligence gathering, which had revealed far more assets and ongoing income than I had initially suspected. Phase 2 would be asset protection, preventing Michael from completing his planned transfers while creating legal mechanisms to recover funds that had already been hidden. Phase 3 would be strategic revelation, timing the disclosure of my knowledge to maximize my legal advantages while minimizing his ability to implement countermeasures. The complexity of Michael's schemes actually worked in my favor once I understood their structure. His confidence in their sophistication had made him careless about documentation and digital security. The same business files that were meant to hide his assets from me contained detailed records that would make excellent evidence in divorce proceedings. His messages with Chloe provided not just proof of infidelity, but evidence of systematic financial fraud and deliberate asset concealment. Michael's behavior during this period of my investigation revealed how completely he had underestimated my capabilities. He continued to ask for money from our joint accounts to cover supposed business expenses, apparently believing that I remained unaware of his substantial hidden income. He maintained his schedule of supposed investor meetings and business trips, not realizing that I now knew many of these trips were actually romantic getaways with Chloe funded by money he had extracted from our marriage. His continued requests for emotional support during his supposed business struggles became increasingly difficult to tolerate as I understood the level of manipulation involved. When he expressed frustration about investor delays, I knew he was actually celebrating successful asset transfers. When he worried about business competition, I knew he was actually strategizing about divorce timing. When he apologized for being distracted and promised that things would improve once his business stabilized, I knew he was managing my expectations during the final phase of his extraction plan. The most chilling aspect of living with this knowledge was recognizing how naturally deception came to Michael. These weren't desperate lies told under pressure, but carefully crafted narratives delivered with genuine seeming emotion. He could express convincing concern about our financial future while actively stealing from our joint resources. He could make loving promises about our life together while finalizing plans to abandon me. He could perform physical intimacy while conducting emotional intimacy with someone else. Understanding the depth of his deception helped me recognize that saving our marriage had never been a realistic option, because our marriage had never truly existed. What I had experienced as partnership had been performance. What I had experienced as mutual support had been unilateral extraction. What I had experienced as shared dreams had been carefully maintained illusions designed to keep me productive and compliant. The pregnancy announcement I had originally planned to share with excitement would now become a strategic revelation, timed to serve my legal interests, rather than our emotional connection. Michael would learn about the pregnancy when it maximized my advantages in divorce proceedings, not when it might trigger genuine paternal feelings that I now knew he was incapable of experiencing. My emotional processing of this betrayal became increasingly analytical rather than purely reactive. The initial shock and hurt were being replaced by professional determination and strategic clarity. Michael had approached our marriage as a business transaction designed to benefit only himself, and I would respond to his deception with the same level of strategic sophistication he had used to implement it. The woman who had built marketing campaigns that generated millions in revenue for Fortune 500 companies was about to apply those same skills to dismantling the fraudulent enterprise that had masqueraded as her marriage. Michael's confidence in his ability to manipulate me had been based on 8 years of successful psychological and financial exploitation, but his past success had created overconfidence that would become his fundamental vulnerability. Every skill I had developed in competitive business environments would be applied to ensuring that systematic deception was met with systematic consequences. The man who had spent years extracting value from my trust, my income, and my emotional investment was about to discover that his primary target possessed resources and capabilities that he had never bothered to recognize or respect. The pregnancy test remained on my counter as a reminder that this was no longer just about recovering what had been stolen from me, but about ensuring that my child would inherit a foundation built on honesty, integrity, and authentic achievement, rather than manipulation, deception, and exploitation. Michael's betrayal had been comprehensive, but my response would be equally thorough and significantly more effective. The confrontation I had been strategically planning for weeks finally came on a Thursday morning when Michael made his most brazen request yet. He needed $40,000 from our joint savings account for what he called a critical business expansion opportunity that couldn't wait for his next round of investor funding. Standing in our kitchen, holding his coffee mug with the casual confidence of a man who had never been questioned, he explained that this investment would finally push his consulting business to the next level. I looked at my husband across the granite countertop that I had paid for, in the kitchen I had renovated with money from my marketing bonuses, and felt something shift inside me that was deeper than anger or hurt. It was the crystalline clarity that comes when you finally stop doubting your own perceptions and start trusting what the evidence has been telling you all along. Michael wasn't asking for $40,000 to invest in his business. He was asking for $40,000 to complete the financial transfers that would hide our community assets before filing for divorce. The pregnancy test was still in the drawer where I had hidden it weeks earlier, along with printed copies of every message, every financial document, and every piece of evidence that revealed the scope of his systematic deception. But more importantly, I had spent those weeks building something Michael couldn't anticipate or counter: a comprehensive legal strategy developed with the best divorce attorney in Phoenix and a forensic accountant who specialized in complex asset recovery. "I need to tell you something before we discuss any financial decisions," I said, my voice steady with the kind of professional calm I used when delivering difficult market analyses to corporate clients. "I'm pregnant, Michael, 8 weeks pregnant. And I know everything." The change in his expression was immediate and revealing. Not surprise about the pregnancy, which confirmed my suspicions that he had somehow known or suspected already. Not joy about becoming a father, which confirmed everything I had discovered about his actual priorities. But calculation, the unmistakable look of someone rapidly reassessing risk and adjusting strategy in real time. "Jennifer, that's wonderful news," he said, but his voice carried the careful modulation of someone buying time rather than expressing genuine emotion. "The timing is challenging with everything happening in the business, but we'll make it work. We always do." "No, Michael, we don't always make it work. I make it work. I've been making everything work for 8 years, while you've been systematically stealing from me and planning to abandon me." I pulled out my phone and showed him screenshots of his messages with Chloe, watching his face cycle through denial, anger, and finally, a kind of cold resignation that told me everything about who he really was underneath the performance. "You went through my private communications," he said, as if privacy concerns were the real issue rather than 8 years of financial fraud and adultery. "That's a violation of trust, Jennifer. I'm disappointed that our marriage has reached a point where you feel you need to spy on me." The audacity of framing his systematic deception as my violation of trust would have been laughable if it weren't so perfectly consistent with everything I had learned about his methods. Even caught with incontrovertible evidence, Michael's instinct was to manipulate rather than acknowledge, to reframe rather than take responsibility. "I've filed for divorce," I continued, ignoring his attempts to redirect the conversation toward my supposed betrayal of his privacy. "I've also filed injunctions freezing all business accounts associated with your various enterprises, pending forensic review." The court was particularly interested in the pattern of asset transfers to entities controlled by your business partner and girlfriend. Michael's coffee mug hit the granite counter harder than intended, and for the first time in our 8-year marriage, I saw genuine fear in his eyes. Not fear of losing me or our relationship, but fear of losing the financial empire he had built using my resources as foundation and security. "You can't do that," he said, and the mask of caring husband finally slipped completely. "Those are legitimate business arrangements. You don't understand the complexity of what I've built. You're going to destroy everything out of jealousy and spite." "I understand exactly what you've built, Michael. I understand that you used my income as collateral for business loans that you never intended to repay from community funds. I understand that you created shell companies to hide assets that legally belong to both of us. I understand that you sold our intellectual property developed during our marriage for $250,000 and hid the proceeds in accounts I wasn't supposed to discover." The forensic accountant's preliminary report had been even more damaging than I had anticipated. Michael's business activities weren't just morally fraudulent. They crossed into legally actionable territory that would make asset recovery much simpler than complex divorce property division. When someone systematically hides community property with intent to defraud their spouse, courts tend to respond with punitive, rather than merely corrective measures. The fitness app sale alone generated enough revenue to pay off our mortgage and fund my child's college education, I continued. Money that you've been hiding while asking me to work overtime to cover household expenses. Money that you planned to take with you when you abandoned your pregnant wife. Michael's expression shifted again, this time towards something I had never seen from him before. Genuine respect for my capabilities. For 8 years, he had underestimated the woman whose income had funded his lifestyle and whose emotional support had enabled his schemes. Now, faced with evidence that I had unraveled complex financial arrangements he thought were beyond my understanding, he was finally seeing me as a worthy opponent rather than a manageable resource. "How long have you known?" he asked. And for the first time, his voice carried no manipulation, no performance, just curiosity about how thoroughly his plans had been compromised. "Long enough to document everything. Long enough to secure legal representation. Long enough to protect myself and my child from whatever you had planned for after your supposed business trip to Nevada next month." I watched his face register surprise that I knew about the planned relocation that was meant to establish residency in a more favorable divorce jurisdiction. "The pregnancy changes things," he said, shifting into negotiation mode with the quick adaptability that had made him successful in legitimate business contexts when he chose to apply himself honestly. "We need to think about what's best for the child, not just react emotionally to relationship problems. The pregnancy doesn't change anything about your systematic financial fraud, Michael. It doesn't change the fact that you've been planning to abandon me for over a year. It doesn't change the evidence of your deliberate asset concealment. If anything, it makes your behavior more despicable, not less." The next 2 hours involved Michael cycling through every manipulation technique he had perfected over 8 years of marriage. He tried remorse, claiming that business pressures had driven him to make poor decisions that didn't reflect his true feelings. He tried bargaining, offering to cancel his planned departure and commit to transparency if I would withdraw the legal proceedings. He tried intimidation, threatening to fight for custody rights and spousal support. He tried emotional manipulation, expressing hurt that I had chosen legal action over marriage counseling. None of it worked because I had spent weeks preparing for exactly these responses. The woman who could analyze consumer behavior patterns and predict market responses had anticipated every strategy Michael might employ once his deception was revealed. More importantly, I had learned enough about his actual character to understand that his remorse was strategic rather than genuine. His promises were tactical rather than meaningful. "Here's what's going to happen," I said, pulling out the settlement proposal my attorney had prepared. "You're going to sign this agreement acknowledging the hidden assets and agreeing to their recovery. You're going to transfer your interest in the house to me as part of equitable distribution. You're going to maintain child support payments through automatic payroll deduction to ensure consistency. And you're going to stay away from me and my child unless supervised visitation is specifically court-ordered." The settlement terms were generous given the scope of his fraud, offering him the opportunity to keep some of his legitimately earned business assets in exchange for cooperation with asset recovery and minimal child custody arrangements. My attorney had advised that punitive divorce proceedings could take years and cost hundreds of thousands in legal fees, potentially leaving both of us financially damaged, while enriching only the lawyers. "And if I refuse?" Michael asked, although his tone suggested he already understood that refusal wasn't really an option. "Then we proceed with forensic investigation, criminal referrals for the business loan fraud, and full contested divorce proceedings where every detail of your deception becomes public record. Your corporate consulting clients might be interested to learn about your methods for hiding business income and manipulating financial reporting." Michael signed the agreement that afternoon, though not before making one final attempt to reframe his cooperation as magnanimous consideration for my emotional state, rather than acknowledgement of legal reality. Even in defeat, he couldn't resist trying to control the narrative, to position himself as the reasonable party, making sacrifices for the greater good. The divorce was finalized within 6 months, faster than my attorney had initially projected due to Michael's cooperation with asset recovery and his desire to minimize public scrutiny of his business methods. The house became mine, along with recovery of funds sufficient to ensure my child's financial security regardless of Michael's future cooperation with support obligations. My daughter Emma was born on a crisp October morning, healthy and strong, surrounded by chosen family who had supported me through the most challenging year of my life. My friend Sarah was in the delivery room, my colleague sent flowers, and my attorney called to confirm that the final asset transfers had been completed according to the settlement agreement. Michael sent a card and requested supervised visitation rights, which the court granted for 2 hours every other Saturday at a family services center. His interest in fatherhood proved as superficial as his interest in marriage had been. Within 3 months, he was missing scheduled visits, and within 6 months, he had relocated to Nevada with Chloe, where they were apparently building the life they had planned to build with money stolen from me. The marketing consulting firm I started from my home office generated enough revenue in its first year to replace my corporate salary, giving me the flexibility to manage single motherhood while building professional success on my own terms. The business grew through referrals from satisfied clients who appreciated working with someone who understood both strategic analysis and ethical business practices. The book I wrote about applying business strategy to personal relationship decisions became a bestseller, resonating with women who recognized their own experiences in my story of systematic manipulation disguised as partnership. The speaking engagements and consulting opportunities that followed created financial abundance that exceeded anything I had achieved while supporting Michael's fictional business empire. Emma grew into a confident, happy child who knew she was wanted and loved unconditionally. She occasionally asked about her father, and I answered her questions honestly, but without bitterness, explaining that some people aren't capable of the kind of love that families require. She accepted this explanation with the wisdom that children often display about adult complications. The house that had once represented the prison of my financial manipulation became the foundation for our authentic life together. Every mortgage payment secured our independence rather than subsidizing someone else's deception. Every renovation project reflected our actual needs rather than maintaining appearances for someone who was systematically betraying us. The pregnancy test that had once represented terrifying uncertainty became a symbol of the most important decision I ever made. Choosing truth over comfortable illusion. Choosing security over false harmony. Choosing my child's authentic future over preserving a relationship that had never truly existed. Michael's systematic deception had cost me 8 years of authentic relationship and hundreds of thousands of dollars in hidden assets, but his betrayal had also revealed capabilities I might never have discovered otherwise. The woman who had defined herself through supporting someone else's dreams became the architect of her own success, building a life and business that reflected her actual values rather than accommodating someone else's manipulation. The mortgage I now paid alone secured a home filled with honesty, integrity, and the quiet confidence that comes from building something real rather than maintaining something false. The child Michael had viewed as an inconvenient complication became the motivation for creating a life of genuine abundance, professionally and personally. Sometimes I received updates about Michael's life in Nevada through mutual acquaintances. His relationship with Chloe had predictably dissolved once she realized his hidden assets weren't as substantial as his deception had made them appear. His business ventures continued their pattern of promising starts and disappointing endings, though now without access to my income as safety net for his failures. The woman who had once paid someone else's mortgage while living in financial uncertainty became a homeowner whose property equity reflected years of authentic investment. The woman who had once supported fictional business ventures became an entrepreneur whose success was built on actual value creation rather than systematic extraction from trusting partners. Emma's nursery wall featured a quote that had become my guiding philosophy: "The truth will set you free, but first it will devastate everything false in your life." Michael's betrayal had indeed devastated everything false, but it had also cleared the foundation for building everything true. The monthly mortgage statement that arrived in my name alone represented more than financial obligation. It documented the price of independence and the value of authenticity. The child Michael had abandoned became the heir to a life built on principles he had never understood: integrity, honest work, and relationships based on mutual respect rather than systematic exploitation. The months following Michael's departure became a testament to the power of strategic planning over emotional reaction. While he had expected me to crumble under the weight of single pregnancy and financial uncertainty, I found myself thriving in ways that 8 years of marriage had never allowed. The house that had once echoed with his manipulative explanations and fictional business crises now hummed with the quiet productivity of someone building authentic success rather than enabling systematic deception. My attorney, Rebecca Martinez, had warned me that men like Michael often attempted reconciliation when they realized their financial schemes had been thoroughly dismantled. Sure enough, 3 weeks after signing the settlement agreement, Michael began what she called the quote-unquote courtship phase of manipulation. Flowers arrived at my office with cards expressing his deep regret and newfound appreciation for everything I had provided during our marriage. Text messages appeared at strategic times, usually late at night when he calculated I might be feeling most vulnerable about single motherhood. The messages followed a predictable pattern that my marketing background made embarrassingly easy to analyze. He would begin with acknowledgement of his mistakes, carefully crafted to sound like genuine remorse without actually admitting to specific wrongdoing. He would follow with promises of change, vague enough to sound transformative but specific enough to address what he calculated were my primary concerns. He would conclude with emotional manipulation designed to trigger my protective instincts and caretaking patterns. "Jennifer, I've been doing a lot of thinking about us and the baby," read one typical message. "I realize I let business pressure cloud my judgment about what really matters. I want to be the husband and father you both deserve. Can we talk about starting fresh? I've made some changes that I think will surprise you." The changes he referenced were entirely cosmetic. He had moved out of the luxury apartment he had been sharing with Chloe and into a modest rental that would look more appropriate for someone claiming financial hardship. He had ended his relationship with Chloe, though whether by choice or necessity was unclear from my investigators' reports. He had even started attending therapy, though the therapist he chose specialized in helping men navigate divorce proceedings, rather than addressing systemic patterns of deception and manipulation. What Michael failed to understand was that his attempts at reconciliation only reinforced my decision to prioritize my child's security over his emotional needs. Every carefully crafted message demonstrated that he remained focused on managing my perceptions rather than examining his own behavior. Every promise of change revealed his fundamental assumption that the problem was his execution of manipulation rather than his decision to manipulate in the first place. The pregnancy progressed smoothly, despite the stress of divorce proceedings and business transitions. My obstetrician, Dr. Sarah Chen, had initially expressed concern about managing such significant life changes during pregnancy, but she became increasingly impressed by my systematic approach to stress management and future planning. Rather than allowing uncertainty to create anxiety, I had channeled my analytical skills into creating comprehensive preparations for every aspect of single motherhood. I researched childcare options with the same thoroughness I applied to market analysis, identifying providers who aligned with my values about child development and educational philosophy. I investigated pediatric practices with the same attention to detail I used for evaluating potential business partners. I planned financial structures for Emma's future education with the same strategic thinking I applied to corporate investment strategies. The consulting business I had started from my home office exceeded my most optimistic projections within 6 months. Corporate clients appreciated working with someone who understood both strategic analysis and implementation challenges, and my reputation for delivering results ahead of schedule and under-budget generated referrals faster than I could accommodate new projects. The income stability allowed me to maintain the house and build substantial savings while working flexible hours that would accommodate motherhood. Michael's supervised visitation requests became increasingly sporadic, as the reality of actual parenting responsibilities conflicted with his romantic fantasies about fatherhood. The family services supervisor noted his tendency to treat visits like performance opportunities rather than relationship-building time with his daughter. He would arrive with elaborate gifts and plans for activities that were more about creating impressive memories than responding to Emma's actual developmental needs. Emma, meanwhile, thrived in an environment defined by consistency, honesty, and unconditional love. Even as an infant, she seemed to sense the difference between authentic care and performative attention. She was relaxed and responsive with people who interacted with her genuinely, including my friends, my colleagues, and the carefully vetted childcare providers who became extended family. With Michael, she remained polite but distant, as if some instinct warned her about investing emotional energy in someone whose attention was unreliable. The book proposal that emerged from my experience attracted interest from 3 major publishers, who recognized the market demand for practical guidance about identifying and responding to systematic manipulation in personal relationships. Strategic Life Design, Applying Business Intelligence to Personal Decision-Making, offered frameworks for analyzing relationship patterns, protecting financial interests, and building authentic partnerships based on mutual respect rather than exploitation. The advance from the publishing deal provided financial security that exceeded anything I had achieved during my marriage, even when Michael's hidden income was included in our household resources. More importantly, it validated my decision to transform personal trauma into professional expertise that could benefit other women facing similar challenges. The marketing campaign for the book generated speaking opportunities at conferences focused on women's financial empowerment and strategic life planning. Michael's attempts to claim credit for my success followed predictable patterns. He suggested to mutual acquaintances that my business achievements were built on foundations he had provided during our marriage, conveniently ignoring the fact that his systematic extraction of resources had forced me to develop independent capabilities in self-defense. He hinted that the book's success was partly due to insights gained from his entrepreneurial experience, apparently forgetting that his entrepreneurial experience consisted primarily of hiding successful ventures while claiming fictional failures. These attempts at narrative control revealed the depth of his inability to accept responsibility for his choices. Even after comprehensive evidence of his deception had been presented in legal proceedings, Michael continued to position himself as a misunderstood visionary, whose methods had been aggressive, but whose intentions had been honorable. He seemed genuinely incapable of acknowledging that systematic deception was inherently destructive, regardless of the financial success it might generate. The first Christmas after our divorce illustrated the difference between authentic celebration and performative gesturing. I created traditions with Emma that reflected our actual values and interests: quiet morning gift exchanges, homemade meals shared with chosen family, evening walks through neighborhoods decorated with lights that reflected other families' authentic joy. Michael sent expensive gifts that were age-inappropriate and accompanied by cards that seemed designed more for my benefit than Emma's, filled with promises about future involvement that his actual behavior contradicted. Emma's first birthday party became a celebration of community rather than obligation. The guests were people who had supported us through the most challenging year of my life. Sarah, who had provided practical help and emotional wisdom. Rebecca Martinez, who had protected our legal interests with fierce competence. Dr. Chen, who had ensured Emma's healthy development. The childcare providers who had become trusted partners in Emma's daily care. The absence of Michael and his extended family felt like relief rather than loss, confirmation that we had built something authentic rather than maintained something false. The speaking engagements that followed the book's publication connected me with women whose stories echoed my own experience in disturbing detail. The patterns of systematic manipulation were remarkably consistent across different demographics and circumstances. Men who approached relationships as resource extraction opportunities used similar methods regardless of their professional backgrounds, financial situations, or claimed personal values. These conversations reinforced my understanding that Michael's behavior represented a character pattern, rather than situational responses to business pressures or life challenges. The women I met had supported partners through various claimed crises: medical school, law school, business startups, career transitions, family emergencies. In every case, the support had been extracted through emotional manipulation, while resources were systematically hidden or diverted to serve the manipulator's independent agenda. The corporate consulting practice expanded to include workshops on identifying and responding to systematic manipulation in professional contexts. Business leaders who had been impressed by my strategic analysis capabilities requested guidance about recognizing similar patterns among employees, partners, and vendors. The skills required to uncover personal deception translated directly to identifying professional fraud, and companies valued training that could protect them from sophisticated manipulation schemes. Emma's development continued to exceed pediatric milestones, thriving in an environment where her needs were prioritized over adult convenience or performance requirements. She was curious, confident, and remarkably resilient, displaying the emotional security that comes from consistent, authentic care. The stability I provided wasn't just financial but psychological, offering her a foundation of trust that would serve her throughout her life. Michael's business ventures in Nevada followed their familiar pattern of promising beginnings and disappointing endings, though now without access to my resources as safety net for his schemes. His relationship with Chloe had dissolved when she realized that his hidden assets weren't as substantial as his manipulation had made them appear. Without someone to extract resources from, his elaborate business plans proved unsustainable, and his lifestyle gradually contracted to match his actual earning capacity, rather than his extraction capabilities. The mortgage payments I made alone each month represented more than financial responsibility. They documented investment in authentic independence. The home that had once been maintained through my sacrifice while Michael built his secret empire now reflected our genuine needs and values. Emma's nursery featured original artwork from local artists rather than expensive decorations chosen for their status value. The garden grew vegetables and flowers that we enjoyed, rather than landscaping designed to impress neighbors who were evaluating our success. The professional recognition that accompanied the book's success led to opportunities I had never imagined during my marriage. Universities invited me to lecture about strategic decision-making and personal empowerment. Corporations sought my expertise for executive leadership development. Media outlets requested interviews about identifying and responding to systematic manipulation in various life contexts. The expertise I had developed in self-defense became valuable knowledge that could benefit others facing similar challenges. Emma's second birthday celebration reflected how thoroughly we had rebuilt our lives around authentic values rather than external expectations. The party was small and focused on her actual interests: bubbles, music, and sensory activities that engaged her curiosity, rather than impressive displays designed for adult approval. The gifts were practical and thoughtful rather than expensive and showy. The guests were people who genuinely cared about Emma's development, rather than people fulfilling social obligations. Michael's continued absence from these meaningful moments reinforced the wisdom of prioritizing our security over his convenience. The supervised visitation schedule he had requested became increasingly irrelevant, as his actual interest in parenting proved minimal compared to his strategic interest in maintaining some legal connection to our lives. Emma didn't ask about him because she had never formed the attachment that absence could disrupt. The financial security generated by multiple income streams allowed me to invest in Emma's future in ways that went beyond traditional savings accounts. I established educational funds that would provide her with choices rather than limitations. I purchased life insurance and disability protection that would ensure her security regardless of unexpected circumstances. I created investment accounts that would teach her about financial planning and strategic thinking as she matured. The house that had once represented the prison of financial manipulation became the foundation for Emma's authentic childhood. Every room reflected our actual needs rather than someone else's performance requirements. The office where I conducted business served Emma's need for predictable structure and routine. The kitchen produced meals that nourished rather than impressed. The living spaces facilitated genuine relaxation rather than maintaining appearances for someone whose attention was conditional and manipulative. The consulting business evolved to include specialized services for women navigating divorce from systematically deceptive partners. The legal and financial strategies I had developed became templates that could be adapted for different circumstances, while maintaining focus on asset protection and child welfare. Working with women who face similar challenges reinforced my understanding that strategic response was more effective than emotional reaction when dealing with sophisticated manipulation. Emma's development continued to reflect the benefits of growing up in an environment where her needs were genuine priorities rather than inconvenient complications. She was empathetic but boundaried, generous but not naive, trusting but appropriately cautious. The emotional intelligence she developed through consistent, honest interaction would serve her well as she encountered manipulative people in her own life experiences. The book's success led to opportunities for expanded impact through online courses, coaching programs, and strategic consulting for organizations focused on women's empowerment. The platform allowed me to reach women who might not have access to traditional legal and financial resources, but who needed practical guidance about identifying and responding to systematic manipulation. The scalability of digital education meant that my experience could benefit thousands rather than dozens of people facing similar challenges. Michael's periodic attempts to reestablish contact became increasingly transparent in their strategic timing. He would reach out during holidays, birthdays, or other occasions when he calculated I might feel sentimental about family connections. His messages maintained their familiar pattern of superficial acknowledgement followed by vague promises and emotional manipulation designed to trigger my caretaking instincts. The consistency of his approach made it easy to recognize and dismiss without emotional engagement. The mortgage statement that arrived each month in my name alone represented more than financial independence. It documented the price of authenticity and the value of strategic decision-making. The home it secured provided Emma with stability that was earned rather than extracted, maintained through honest work rather than systematic deception. The foundation we built together was strong enough to support expansion, rather than requiring constant maintenance against hidden threats. Emma's third birthday approached with quiet celebration rather than elaborate performance. She was healthy, happy, and secure in the knowledge that she was unconditionally loved and consistently supported. The life we had built together reflected values that Michael had never understood: integrity, honest communication, and authentic partnership between people who respected rather than exploited each other. The woman who had once paid someone else's mortgage while living in financial uncertainty had become a homeowner whose equity reflected genuine investment rather than manipulated extraction. The woman who had once supported fictional business ventures had become an entrepreneur whose success was built on actual value creation rather than systematic deception. The mother who had been abandoned during pregnancy had created a family structure defined by love, security, and mutual respect rather than obligation, manipulation, and conditional affection. 5 years had passed since the morning I discovered Michael's true nature through his carelessly abandoned phone, and the transformation in our lives had exceeded every optimistic projection I had dared to make during those dark, early months of pregnancy and divorce proceedings. Emma was now a vibrant 5-year-old with an intuitive understanding of authenticity that amazed everyone who met her. She could sense genuine warmth within minutes of meeting someone new, while maintaining polite distance from people whose attention felt performative or conditional. The consulting firm that had begun as a desperate attempt to create flexible income for single motherhood had evolved into Collins Strategic Consulting, a nationally recognized practice specializing in organizational integrity and leadership authenticity. My team of 12 consultants worked with Fortune 500 companies to identify and eliminate toxic patterns that undermined productivity, damaged employee retention, and created legal vulnerabilities. The same analytical skills that had unraveled Michael's deception proved invaluable for helping corporations recognize when charismatic leaders were actually systematic manipulators, whose short-term results masked long-term organizational damage. The irony wasn't lost on me that Michael's betrayal had inadvertently launched me into the most fulfilling and financially rewarding career of my life. The expertise I had developed in recognizing manipulation, documenting deception, and implementing strategic responses had become specialized knowledge that companies paid premium rates to access. What had begun as personal survival skills had transformed into professional competencies that generated multiple seven-figure annual revenues. Emma's kindergarten teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez, had requested a conference to discuss what she called Emma's unusual emotional maturity and, quote, sophisticated understanding of relationship dynamics. During our meeting, she shared observations that both worried and impressed her about Emma's interactions with classmates and adults. Emma has an extraordinary ability to identify when someone is being genuine versus when they're performing, Mrs. Rodriguez explained. She responds beautifully to authentic praise and correction, but she becomes very quiet and withdrawn when adults use manipulative techniques to manage children's behavior. It's almost as if she has built-in radar for detecting insincerity. I wasn't surprised by these observations. Emma had been raised in an environment where honesty was prioritized over convenience, where promises were kept rather than strategically broken, where her needs were considered rather than dismissed as inconvenient complications. She had never experienced the confusion of loving someone whose words contradicted their actions, never learned to accept explanation as substitute for authentic behavior. The book's success had led to opportunities I never could have imagined during my marriage. Universities invited me to develop curriculum about strategic decision-making and relationship intelligence. Government agencies consulted with me about identifying manipulation in international negotiations. Law enforcement requested training about recognizing sophisticated fraud patterns in domestic contexts. The knowledge forced upon me by Michael's systematic deception had become expertise that served much larger purposes than my individual recovery. Michael's attempts to remain relevant in our lives had dwindled to occasional birthday cards and sporadic child support payments that arrived precisely on legal deadlines, rather than with any suggestion of genuine paternal concern. His supervised visitation rights had been formally terminated when he missed 6 consecutive scheduled appointments without explanation. The court had noted that his pattern of inconsistent engagement was potentially harmful to Emma's developing understanding of reliable relationships. The private investigator I occasionally hired to monitor Michael's activities reported a predictable cycle of promising new ventures followed by disappointing failures, usually coinciding with the end of relationships with women who had initially provided financial or emotional support. Without access to someone else's resources as safety net, Michael's entrepreneurial ambitions consistently exceeded his actual capabilities and commitment levels. Emma rarely asked about her father anymore, having learned through experience that adults who made promises they didn't keep were less interesting than those who consistently followed through on their commitments. She was surrounded by reliable male figures. My business partner David, who had become a trusted friend and occasional babysitter. Dr. Martinez, our pediatrician who never rushed through appointments. Mr. Chen, our neighbor who taught Emma about gardening and helped maintain our vegetable garden. The second book, Rebuilding After Betrayal, Strategic Recovery from Systematic Deception, had performed even better than the first, resonating with readers who recognized their own experiences in detailed case studies drawn from my consulting practice. The book provided practical frameworks for rebuilding trust in oneself after experiencing gaslighting, for protecting assets during emotionally manipulative relationships, and for creating support systems that prioritized authentic connection over convenient accommodation. The speaking engagements generated by both books had taken me across the country and internationally, sharing platforms with experts in psychology, law enforcement, and organizational behavior. The common thread in all these conversations was recognizing that systematic manipulation wasn't a relationship problem, but a character problem, requiring strategic rather than emotional responses to address effectively. Emma accompanied me on several business trips, experiencing different cities and cultures while maintaining her school schedule through carefully planned remote learning arrangements. She was remarkably adaptable, comfortable in airports and hotels, engaged by new experiences but always happy to return to the security of our home in Phoenix. Her confidence in unfamiliar situations reflected the foundation of security we had built together, through consistent routines and reliable communication. The house that had once echoed with Michael's elaborate explanations for his failures and fictional crises now hummed with the productive energy of genuine success. Emma's artwork decorated refrigerator spaces that had once displayed Michael's business plans and investor proposals. Her books filled shelves that had once held his motivational literature about entrepreneurial success. Her toys occupied spaces that had once been cluttered with his abandoned projects and incomplete schemes. The financial security generated by multiple revenue streams had allowed me to establish foundations for Emma's future that went far beyond traditional savings accounts. Educational trusts would provide her with choices rather than limitations when she reached college age. Investment portfolios would teach her about strategic financial planning and compound growth. Real estate holdings would offer her options for security and independence that I had never possessed during my marriage. The collaborative partnerships I had developed with other professionals in related fields created a network of expertise that served clients facing various forms of systematic manipulation. Attorneys who specialized in high-conflict divorce, therapists who understood narcissistic abuse patterns, financial advisors who could uncover hidden assets, private investigators who documented deceptive behavior patterns. Together, we provided comprehensive support for people navigating betrayal by partners who had appeared loving but were actually predatory. Emma's 6th birthday party reflected how thoroughly we had integrated authentic success into our daily lives. The celebration was held at our home, which had been renovated to include spaces designed specifically for Emma's interests and developmental needs. The playroom featured art supplies and building materials that encouraged creativity rather than consumption. The backyard included gardens where Emma could learn about nurturing growth rather than demanding immediate gratification. The guest list included people who had supported us through various phases of our reconstruction. Sarah, who had provided crucial emotional support during the divorce proceedings. Rebecca Martinez, whose legal expertise had protected our interests. Dr. Chen, who had guided Emma's healthy development. David, whose business partnership had created opportunities for expansion. Mrs. Rodriguez, who had recognized Emma's special qualities and adapted her teaching methods accordingly. Michael's absence from this celebration felt natural rather than sad, confirmation that we had built something authentic rather than maintained something false. Emma didn't miss him because she had never formed the attachment that absence could disrupt. She understood that some people were capable of consistent love while others were not, and she had learned to invest her emotional energy in relationships that reciprocated rather than extracted. The consulting practice had evolved to include specialized services for organizations dealing with leaders whose charisma masked systematic manipulation. Corporate boards sought my expertise when they suspected that impressive quarterly results were achieved through methods that would create long-term damage. Human resource departments requested training about identifying hiring candidates whose interview performances concealed character problems that would eventually create legal and cultural liabilities. These professional applications of personal experience reinforced my understanding that Michael's behavior represented a character pattern, rather than situational responses to stress or opportunity. The techniques he had used to extract resources from our marriage were identical to methods used by manipulative leaders who damaged organizations while enriching themselves. The same strategic approaches that had protected me from personal exploitation could protect companies from professional manipulation. Emma's academic performance consistently exceeded grade-level expectations. But more importantly, her teachers noted her unusual capacity for authentic empathy combined with appropriate boundaries. She could recognize when classmates needed support without sacrificing her own needs to provide it. She could appreciate adult guidance without surrendering her independent thinking. She had learned to trust her instincts about people's motivations while remaining open to genuine connection. The media attention generated by my books and speaking engagements had attracted interest from documentary filmmakers who wanted to explore the intersection of personal betrayal and corporate fraud. The patterns were remarkably similar: charismatic individuals who excelled at impression management while systematically violating trust relationships for personal benefit. The documentary project would combine personal stories with expert analysis, helping audiences recognize manipulation techniques before becoming victims. Michael's periodic attempts to reestablish contact had evolved from desperate reconciliation efforts to strategic positioning for potential financial benefit. His messages now focused on Emma's academic achievements and his desire to contribute to her educational expenses, carefully avoiding acknowledgement of his systematic abandonment of parental responsibilities. The transparency of his motivation made it easy to maintain boundaries without emotional engagement. The mortgage payments I made each month represented more than financial obligation. They documented investment in sustainable independence that couldn't be compromised by someone else's deception or abandonment. The home they secured provided Emma with stability that was earned through honest work, rather than extracted through systematic manipulation. Every improvement we made reflected our actual values, rather than performance requirements for someone whose attention was conditional and unreliable. The business expansion had required hiring additional staff, creating employment opportunities for professionals who shared my commitment to ethical practice and authentic service delivery. The team included consultants who specialized in different aspects of manipulation, recognition, and response, financial experts who could trace hidden assets, communication specialists who could identify gaslighting patterns, legal professionals who understood complex fraud investigations. Emma's 7th birthday approached with quiet anticipation rather than elaborate performance requirements. She had requested a small gathering focused on activities she genuinely enjoyed: art projects, garden exploration, and cooking experiments. The simplicity of her preferences reflected the security of knowing that her authentic interests were valued, rather than redirected to serve adult convenience or social expectations. The woman who had once supported someone else's fictional business ventures while living in financial uncertainty had become an entrepreneur whose success was built on genuine value creation rather than resource extraction. The mother who had been abandoned during pregnancy had created a family structure defined by mutual respect, honest communication, and reliable support rather than manipulation, exploitation, and conditional affection. Emma's development continued to reflect the benefits of growing up in an environment where authenticity was prioritized over convenience, where promises were kept rather than strategically modified, where her needs were considered rather than dismissed as complications to adult agendas. The emotional intelligence she had developed through consistent, honest relationships would serve her throughout her life as she encountered people whose motivations were less transparent than their performances suggested. The consulting practice had generated enough revenue to establish a charitable foundation focused on providing legal and financial support for women navigating divorce from systematically deceptive partners. The foundation offered grants for attorney fees, forensic accounting services, and temporary housing assistance for women whose support systems had been systematically undermined by manipulative partners. The same expertise that had protected our interests could now protect other families facing similar challenges. Michael's business activities in Nevada continued to follow predictable patterns of promising beginnings and disappointing endings, though now without access to external resources that could subsidize his schemes when they inevitably failed. His lifestyle had gradually contracted to match his actual earning capacity rather than his extraction capabilities, and his attempts to maintain impressive appearances had become increasingly desperate and transparent. The speaking engagement opportunities had expanded to include international conferences focused on organizational integrity and leadership authenticity. The same principles that applied to identifying personal manipulation were relevant for recognizing corporate fraud, political deception, and social manipulation. The expertise developed through personal survival had become knowledge that could serve much broader purposes than individual recovery. Emma's 8th birthday celebration reflected how completely we had reconstructed our lives around authentic values, rather than external expectations or performance requirements. The party was held at home, surrounded by people who genuinely cared about Emma's development, rather than fulfilling social obligations or maintaining strategic relationships. The gifts were practical and thoughtful, rather than expensive and impressive, chosen to support her actual interests rather than create photo opportunities for social media. The foundation of security we had built together was strong enough to support expansion in multiple directions: professional growth that served larger purposes, personal relationships that prioritized authenticity over convenience, financial independence that couldn't be compromised by someone else's deception or abandonment. The mortgage that had once represented sacrifice for someone else's benefit now documented investment in our shared future built on mutual respect and honest communication. The transformation from victim of systematic deception to recognized expert in manipulation recognition had taken 8 years of strategic planning, consistent effort, and unwavering commitment to prioritizing truth over comfort. The woman who had once defined herself through supporting someone else's fictional dreams had become the architect of authentic success that served her own values while helping others facing similar challenges. Emma's future stretched ahead, filled with possibilities that were genuinely available, rather than promises that might be strategically broken when convenient. The education funds established through honest work would provide her with choices rather than limitations. The emotional foundation built through reliable relationships would help her recognize manipulation attempts before they could damage her developing sense of self-worth. The example of strategic response to betrayal would teach her that authentic strength came through principled action rather than accommodation of deceptive behavior. 10 years had elapsed since that fateful morning when Michael's abandoned phone revealed the elaborate web of lies that had defined our marriage, and Emma was now a confident 15-year-old, whose wisdom about human nature consistently surprised adults who encountered her. She possessed an almost supernatural ability to distinguish between people who were genuinely interested in her well-being versus those who were performing kindness for strategic purposes. This discernment had served her well throughout middle school, where she navigated social complexities with a maturity that impressed teachers and concerned some parents who wondered why their own children couldn't demonstrate similar emotional intelligence. The consulting empire I had built from the ashes of Michael's betrayal now employed over 40 professionals across 3 offices in Phoenix, Denver, and Austin. Collins Strategic Consulting had become the premier firm for organizational integrity assessment, with Fortune 100 companies seeking our expertise when they suspected that impressive performance metrics might be masking systematic ethical violations or leadership manipulation. The same analytical frameworks I had developed to uncover Michael's hidden assets now helped corporations identify when charismatic executives were enriching themselves while destroying long-term organizational health. Emma's high school counselor, Dr. Patricia Williams, had requested a meeting to discuss what she described as Emma's exceptional capacity for authentic leadership and her unusual approach to peer relationships. During our conversation, Dr. Williams shared observations that both impressed and concerned her about Emma's interactions with classmates and authority figures. Emma has remarkable ability to inspire genuine collaboration without resorting to manipulation or coercion, Dr. Williams explained. She can motivate group projects through authentic enthusiasm rather than social pressure. She responds positively to constructive feedback while maintaining appropriate skepticism about praise that seems excessive or unearned. Most remarkably, she seems completely immune to the kind of social manipulation that typically defines teenage dynamics. These observations didn't surprise me, given Emma's upbringing in an environment where authentic communication was prioritized over convenient fiction, where promises were honored rather than strategically modified, where her developing autonomy was respected rather than undermined through guilt or manipulation. She had never learned to accept inconsistency between words and actions, never been trained to prioritize other people's comfort over her own legitimate needs. The documentary series that had emerged from my books and speaking engagements had won several awards for its exploration of systematic manipulation in various contexts, from personal relationships to corporate fraud to political deception. The series combined individual stories with expert analysis, helping audiences recognize manipulation techniques across different environments, while providing practical guidance for strategic response rather than emotional reaction. Michael's current circumstances, according to my occasional monitoring through public records and social media, reflected the predictable trajectory of someone whose success had always depended on extracting resources from others rather than creating genuine value. His ventures in Nevada had followed familiar patterns of initial enthusiasm followed by financial difficulties, usually coinciding with the departure of business partners who discovered his methods for shifting responsibility while claiming credit. Emma rarely mentioned her biological father anymore, having long since accepted that some people were capable of consistent love, while others were fundamentally unreliable. She was surrounded by dependable male figures who demonstrated authentic care through actions rather than promises. David, my business partner who had become a trusted mentor. Dr. Rodriguez, our family physician who had provided consistent care throughout Emma's childhood. Professor Chen, our neighbor who had taught Emma advanced mathematics and critical thinking skills. The third book in my series, Legacy Building: Creating Authentic Success After Systematic Betrayal, had resonated with readers who wanted practical guidance about transforming personal trauma into meaningful contribution. The book explored how individual recovery from manipulation could generate expertise that served broader purposes, helping readers understand that healing didn't require forgetting, but rather integrating difficult experiences into expanded wisdom and enhanced capabilities. Emma's academic achievements consistently exceeded expectations, but more significantly, her teachers noted her unusual combination of intellectual excellence with emotional maturity and social responsibility. She excelled in advanced placement courses while maintaining genuine friendships based on mutual respect rather than social positioning. She participated in leadership activities without dominating others, contributed to group discussions without monopolizing attention, and offered help to struggling classmates without creating dependency relationships. The international speaking opportunities had expanded to include presentations at universities, government agencies, and professional conferences focused on recognizing and responding to systematic deception in various contexts. The principles I had developed through personal necessity had proven applicable to organizational management, international negotiations, and educational environments where manipulation could undermine legitimate objectives. Michael's attempts to reestablish contact had evolved from desperate reconciliation efforts to calculated positioning for potential financial advantage, particularly as Emma's achievements began generating local media attention through academic competitions and leadership recognitions. His messages now expressed pride in her accomplishments, while carefully avoiding acknowledgement of his complete absence during the years when she had developed the capabilities he now wanted to claim partial credit for inspiring. The mortgage payments that arrived each month in my name represented more than financial obligation. They documented investment in sustainable independence that had generated opportunities neither Michael nor I could have imagined during our marriage. The home they secured had become a sanctuary, where Emma could develop her authentic interests without performance pressure, where her questions were answered honestly, rather than deflected through manipulation, where her achievements were celebrated without being exploited for adult validation. The business expansion had created employment opportunities for professionals who shared my commitment to ethical practice and authentic service delivery. The team included specialists in various aspects of manipulation recognition and organizational health assessment, forensic accountants who could trace hidden financial irregularities, communication experts who could identify gaslighting patterns in corporate environments, legal professionals who understood complex fraud investigations, and therapists who specialized in recovery from systematic deception. Emma's 16th birthday approached with excitement about expanded privileges and responsibilities, rather than anxiety about meeting external expectations or maintaining appearances for strategic purposes. She had requested a celebration focused on activities that reflected her genuine interests: art creation, scientific experimentation, and community service projects that addressed issues she cared about, rather than resume-building activities designed to impress college admissions committees. The charitable foundation, established through business success, had distributed over $2 million in grants to support women navigating divorce from systematically deceptive partners. The foundation provided funding for attorney fees, forensic accounting services, temporary housing assistance, and counseling support for women whose resources had been systematically depleted by manipulative relationships. The same expertise that had protected our family could now protect hundreds of other families facing similar challenges. Emma's college preparation reflected her mature understanding of authentic achievement versus performative success. She was interested in programs that would develop her capabilities rather than enhance her social status, in universities that prioritized learning over networking, in career paths that would allow her to contribute meaningfully rather than accumulate impressive credentials. Her approach to future planning demonstrated wisdom that many adults never developed about distinguishing between genuine opportunity and strategic positioning. The consulting practice had generated sufficient revenue to establish multiple trust funds that would provide Emma with financial security, while teaching her about strategic investment and responsible wealth management. Unlike the hidden assets that Michael had accumulated through deception, these resources were transparent, ethically generated, and designed to enhance rather than replace Emma's own earning capacity through honest work and authentic contribution. Michael's business activities continued following predictable cycles of promising announcements followed by quiet failures, though his ability to attract initial investment had declined, as his reputation for unreliability became more widely known within entrepreneurial networks. His attempts to maintain impressive appearances had become increasingly desperate and transparent, particularly as his age made it more difficult to position failures as learning experiences rather than pattern indicators. The speaking engagements and media appearances had created a platform for addressing systematic manipulation as a societal issue rather than merely an individual relationship problem. The same techniques used by personally manipulative individuals were employed by corrupt organizations, deceptive political movements, and fraudulent business enterprises. Understanding these patterns could help people protect themselves across multiple life contexts, while contributing to broader social awareness about deception recognition and ethical leadership. Emma's involvement in community service projects reflected her understanding that authentic success included responsibility for contributing to others' welfare, rather than merely accumulating personal advantages. She volunteered with organizations that supported women recovering from domestic violence, tutored younger students who needed academic assistance, and participated in environmental conservation efforts that would benefit future generations, rather than generate immediate recognition for her participation. The transformation from victim of systematic betrayal to recognized expert in manipulation prevention had taken 15 years of consistent effort, strategic planning, and unwavering commitment to prioritizing truth over convenience. The woman who had once defined herself through supporting someone else's fictional ambitions had become an independent leader whose authentic achievements served her own values while helping countless others recognize and respond to similar challenges. Emma's future stretched ahead, filled with possibilities that were genuinely available, rather than promises that might be strategically withdrawn when convenient for someone else's agenda. The educational opportunities funded through honest earnings would provide her with choices based on merit, rather than manipulation. The emotional foundation built through reliable relationships would help her recognize deception attempts before they could compromise her developing sense of authentic self-worth and independent capability. The house that had once echoed with Michael's elaborate justifications for systematic deception now resonated with productive energy generated by genuine accomplishment and authentic relationships. Emma's achievements filled spaces that had once displayed Michael's fictional business plans and impossible promises. Her genuine friendships brought joy that contrasted sharply with the performative relationships Michael had maintained for strategic advantage rather than authentic connection. The legacy being built through strategic response to betrayal extended far beyond individual recovery to encompass broader social impact through professional expertise, charitable contribution, and educational influence. Emma would inherit not just financial security but knowledge about recognizing manipulation, responding strategically to deception, and building authentic success through ethical practices and genuine relationship investment. The monthly mortgage statement that arrived in my name alone represented more than property ownership. It documented the price of independence and the value of authentic achievement over manipulative extraction. The foundation we had built together was strong enough to support Emma's expansion in any direction she chose, while providing security that couldn't be compromised by someone else's deception, abandonment, or strategic positioning for personal advantage. Michael's systematic betrayal had indeed devastated everything false in our lives, but it had also cleared space for building everything genuine, lasting, and meaningful. The pregnancy he had viewed as inconvenient complication had produced a daughter whose wisdom, integrity, and authentic capability would serve the world in ways his deceptive schemes never could have contributed. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.